Excellent. So yes, welcome to everyone. Welcome to what is the penultimate session of the online program of the OCJN. To borrow a phrase from Diego, good morning, good day, good evening, wherever you are, wherever you're joining us from. I know some of you it's very early in the morning. For others, it is late at night. Something really exciting lined up for you today, I think, though. So thanks for joining us. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our guest, and we're going to be getting into some conversation. Some of you have sent questions already, so thank you for those. And just to remind you, if you do have things that you want to ask as you're listening in, please do post them into the chat, and I will come to as many of those questions as we got time for later on in the call. Just one reminder before we get going, we'll be recording today's session and posting it later on Circle. So if you do want to watch back, it's going to be on the record. So if you do want to revisit any of it, you can do it there. But in terms of an introduction, I'm delighted to say that our guest today is the Academy Award-winning director, writer, and producer Adam McKay. You will no doubt be familiar with a lot of Adam's work from across his 30-year career. He's been one of the minds behind movies such as Anchorman, Step Brothers, The Big Short, and Vice, and some really major TV shows, including Succession, where he's been executive producer. But the reason we've invited Adam here today is because now much of his work and his craft and his energy is going into telling stories around climate change. And he's doing that in lots and lots of different ways. His blockbuster movie, Don't Look Up, obviously was a major moment for mainstream climate storytelling a few years ago. Still one of Netflix's most popular films globally, I think. And I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, but he's pretty consumed with the idea of trying to push stories of climate awareness and climate action and climate impacts forwards, using all kinds of tools from podcasts to documentaries, comedy to satire. So Adam, big welcome to the OCJN. We're really excited that you're joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Brilliant.
Looking forward to our conversation.
Brilliant. You and I first met in January of this year. We met online because I was speaking to you at home in Los Angeles, where we were reflecting on what was a very challenging period for the city, midway through experiencing those climate change propelled wildfires. We're almost a year on now from that. So how do you reflect on that experience, that situation? I know a lot of I know that you know a lot of people that were affected, and also I welcome your thoughts on how you feel like the city at large or the community that you move in are navigating the aftermath of what's happened.
Yeah, it was a really strange time because it was utterly predictable. If you're even vaguely climate aware, you know that the flash drought, extreme wind conversation is a great and serious danger. So it really, when you're dealing with a mainstream news media that is essentially blacking out climate, it puts you in a very unusual situation as an individual. About 2 years before those fires, I had told a friend, you have to sell your house now, like you're in great danger. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And then I told my editor, you should sell your house. And he because he was working with me, looked at me like I was a little less crazy. And then leading up to the fires, the local news was like, fire alert, be careful. And there were some of us that were posting like, we are in a new climate. The danger is enhanced. And I remember getting responses. I posted it on social media, and there were people like mocking my alarm and, whatever. So, but afterwards was probably the most disturbing part, where we'd experienced this climate fire, and yet all of the local news. I mean, maybe there's one or two exceptions, but the entire conversation revolved around how did the fire start? And it was all about arson and like a downed power line. And there were a bunch of us pointing out that we've had arsonists forever. There's been downed power lines forever. But the takeaway for 90% of the people that went through that, they had zero climate awareness, and to this day still don't. So it was a really humbling experience where I realized how effective the oil companies, the banks that fund them, the corporations that own the media really are, that you could go through a horror show like that. And for the most part, I didn't really see any large change in policy. Our mayor of LA had cut the budget for the firefighters like a year before. And sure enough, those of us that are climate aware were like, this is a bad idea. And the fire chief pointed out that she didn't have the resources, and the mayor just fired her. So it was, I really woke up with that, because you would think something that devastating would clear, would hit people's eyes, but it did not. And yeah, it was scary.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, that is a repeat theme, that even those that are most seriously affected by the outcomes of climate change, it often doesn't lead to the sort of I don't know, awareness, wake up moment that you might presume it might. And you're right that that's certainly like a kind of a comment on the sort of systems that we find ourselves in, like particularly the kind of US context that you spend most of your time in. From your perspective, I suppose just to follow up on that, like that sounds quite discouraging. And so how can we move forward from there? Like in terms of that awareness or those connections, or the sense that people might have agency, even if they were deeply affected, lost homes, lost loved ones, etc., to climate change.
I think it's really important not to get caught up in the dynamic of discouraging or encouraging. Every interaction is just information gathering. So we run a non-for-profit climate studio out of LA called Yellow Dot. And yeah, we were all a little depressed and freaked out by the response, but we quickly snapped into what are we learning from this and what can we do? And look, I mean, we're up against trillions of dollars. We're up against literally the fossil fuel industry is the blood of the industrial revolution. And it's really important to like not feel like there's going to be one moment. We have to look, we have to acknowledge, we have to warn, acknowledge, and then learn. Warn, acknowledge, learn. And so for me, it was kind of a like grow the hell up moment, because initially I was pissed. I was, disdainful of the media and putting posts out there. But yeah, we have to and warn, acknowledge, and learn.
Mm.
Because the good news is this system that has been created, this global economic system, it's destroying itself. Like it cannot function. The same way that Enron collapsed, the housing market, this system has no end goal. It's a blind foraging creature. And we need to be ready when it collapses because it will. And we need to have our ducks in a row and we need to know what we're going to do when this system collapses and goes past us. So, in that sense, the LA fires, I learned a lot from that. I mean, I had a really good friend that I had told 2 years before, like, sell your house. And I talked to him, and he just said to me, like, I thought you were exaggerating. I never knew that it could be this soon. And I realized, like, essentially, it becomes like me, even though I'm just repeating science, it becomes like me, Adam McKay, versus the New York Times, the Washington Post, the BBC, the US government, Western governments. And you're going to lose that battle every single time. So, yeah, it was very instructive in that I started looking at the way that myself and the amazing people that I work with at Yellow Dot and our for-profit company, Hyperobject, the way that we look at addressing what ails us. I mean, because it really is like a viral infection that we would go this far. I'm sure you've all seen, the German scientists who just said 3C by 2050. Well, I'm sure everyone on this Zoom knows that 3C is like the end. I mean, 3C is like, you don't even get Road Warrior or like Children of Men out of like 3C. It's game over. And the fact that that information just came out and no one's talking about it points to a deep illness and almost like a viral infection. And for me, it's been a journey of like losing that judgment because early on I was so angry at, because we're in Hollywood, we get to talk to politicians and billionaires. And initially, I was so angry about their denial. But after the LA fires, I shifted more to curiosity. And, clearly, the groups I work with, our approach is not working. So, what is really going on here? And I think it's really important that we do the work we do in a state of curiosity rather than judgment.
I wanted to, I mean, you spoke a little bit about that there in terms of you have sort of, within all of the work that you do, you work with two organizations that are, pretty dedicated to telling these stories around climate change now. This takes up an awful lot of your kind of your brain energy, your time, your creativity. Like what just briefly, can you tell us like what I mean you're obviously incredibly well in tune with the situation that we're facing now, but I presume there was a time when you weren't. And so when was there a sort of like a penny drop moment for you where you were like, you know what, my role in this is that I can tell these stories. I'm gonna kind of go a 180 and I'm gonna spend all my time talking about this. What just give us a little bit of the kind of personal insight there.
Yeah, we were working on a movie that we made called Vice, which was about Dick Cheney, one of the most destructive, amoral figures that has ever come through the history of the United States. And it's at one point I discovered, because I read everything, we hired a journalist to like interview people. I mean, because there really wasn't a definitive work about this malevolent, destructive figure, and the people around him. And we started talking to the head of the EPA at the time, who was a Republican governor, and she was pissed. And Cheney had undermined, believe it or not, George W. Bush is horrible, but he wasn't so horrible that he wasn't going to do something about climate. And Cheney kneecapped him, took him out. I mean, Cheney was a master of bureaucratic warfare. But out of that, I started asking the question, well, how bad is it? Because I had seen, like I'm sure all of you, the Al Gore documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. So I was aware we have a real problem here. But after discovering Christy Todd Whitman, by the way, was the Republican head of the EPA, and she is still mad about what Cheney did, I just started asking the question, well, how bad was his delay of climate action? And I started asking other people, reading books. We finished the movie, we released it, and I kept looking for that answer that would tell me, no, it's fine. The people in charge are working on it, and I could never find it. And I kept going deeper and deeper. I was talking to senators. I was talking to, we're in Hollywood, so we get access to these people. And I was talking to billionaires, and I never got a satisfactory answer. And then at one point, I remember I read David Wallace Wells's book, Uninhabitable Earth. And then I read a couple of the other articles and reports from scientists. And it reached a point where I couldn't sleep. And my wife, who, by the way, anyone who knows me, I am a world-class sleeper. I love to sleep. I get 8 hours every night, sometimes 9. And my wife was like, what's going on? I was like, I think we're in real trouble. And from that point on, I just talked to every scientist, climate journalist, anyone I could talk to, praying for an answer that was, we're taking care of this, don't worry. And I never got it. And now we sit here with that recent report from the German scientists that we could hit 3 degrees Celsius warming by 2050. And I read that piece. I have yet to read their exact findings, but it didn't surprise me. And honestly, I think 2 degrees Celsius warming is enough to destabilize the entire world, society, civilization. So it's really, it's been a horrible journey, but one that feels very necessary, because if we're in this moment, I'm not going to go down quiet or not helping. And I think this whole approach to climate, and God bless the climate journalists. I have several friends, and you guys have gotten your teeth kicked in by the corporate media ownership. So if we're going to go down, let's go down loud and fighting. But ultimately, I don't think we will go down. So anyway, yeah.
I want to bring in some, like, I'm going to weave in some of the questions that members of our community had sent me ahead of this call today, just as we go along. I had one here from Lou Albano, who's a journalist based in the Philippines, and Lou was asking a question about Don't Look Up, and I suppose it's something that we're keen to ask about, obviously, because the film has entertained many, many millions of people around the world. And now there's a little bit of distance, I suppose, for you to think about the impact of that film and the way it was received, and what it might or might not have led to in terms of like your intentions and things like that. And Lou says, I thought it was so perfect that that movie proved quite polarizing. What was your intended reaction from the audiences?
I mean, I could talk for hours about the reaction to that film because I've always said every film you release teaches you something about the subject, yourself, the audience. And oh my, did Don't Look Up do that? And it was really two stages. It was the first stage that was for the critics, which in the United States was brutal. I mean, they were like going after me personally. I at one point I tried to point out that like clearly like some of these critics don't know anything about climate change, and then our warped media, social media, turn that into me saying if you don't like the movie, you're a climate denier. It was just ugly. But then the movie went worldwide, and wow, it was beautiful and affirming. And what I learned is even though the movie is about climate change, it really struck a universal chord for 70, 80, 90 other countries as diverse as Pakistan, Nigeria, Brazil, Thailand, that the global population is being gaslit on a daily basis. And I noticed like Brazil like loved the movie because they had Bolsonaro as their leader, who's a second-rate fascist science denier. So it was an experience like and really it changed me to the degree that it taught me not to look for the outside approval, but to look for the truth, in myself as a filmmaker, the people that I value, what the larger subject is. So yeah, it was really I've just never experienced that. I mean, we made the Dick Cheney movie, and there were large swaths of the corporate news media that had also ignored the lies that led us to the Iraq War, that were pissed about that movie. Yeah, Don't Look Up was a whole other level. It's funny, every movie you make, you have little regrets, things you would change. I'm not sure there's one single thing I would change with Don't Look Up. And if you like the movie, you're like, yeah. If you don't like it, you would say you're an a-hole or whatever. But personally, I'm not sure there's one frame I would change of that movie. It perfectly represents the way I was experiencing the world, which was and is a farcical, comical, slapstick comedy with real dark, tragic outcomes. And ever since then, it's done nothing but kind of reconfirm that with the clowns who have taken over the United States, the kind of empty suit, blank eyed guy that's in charge of the UK, Macron with his perfect hair. I'm like, I'm good with that.
Mm. I wanted to say, I mean, it's interesting. In the OCJN, we talk about so much. We talk about the types of stories that we need to reach people with like the messages that we're trying to carry, right? And throughout your career, you've done really powerful stuff using what you just mentioned there, comedy, satire, things not really associated with climate change because as you've outlined very eloquently, it's an incredibly serious situation. So to go away and write a dark comedy about the situation we find ourselves in is kind of an innovation in itself. And one of our journalists, part of this community who sent a question is Vitas, and Vitas is a sports journalist based in the US trying to find ways to connect the popularity of global sports with climate change. And Vitas asks, what tone do you think should be used for climate messaging and storytelling? Examples being hope, fear, anger, etc. It's a topic that's debated a lot in media and environmental circles, and there doesn't seem to be any consensus on what the best route is. So I suppose, big question, but what do you think about that? Given that your chosen weapon, so to speak, has been dark comedy over the years.
Yeah, I think there's no set rule. I think everything is circumstantial and you make your decisions off of that. If you're doing sports, which I'm a huge sports fan, you have a lot of energy behind you. Like people, if you look at the world as two different layers, as why do we adhere to society with all of its rules and fines and prisons? We adhere to it because we want good food. We love our family. We love sex, being single. We love the fun, laughter. But one of the main kind of pillars is play and organized play, and sports are really powerful. So, if we were talking about a climate journalist who's writing for The Guardian or whatever, I would have a very different response to that journalist than a journalist who's writing about sports. And I would say if you're writing about that, a sentence or two will be really powerful. And as an example, there's a crazy story going on right now in Tokyo, in Japan, and the outlying suburbs. And some of you are probably aware of this, but there's been like 230 bear attacks in the last couple of months. And we're talking about people that are like in the like legit suburbs of Tokyo who are like leaving a public bathroom and an Asiatic black bear is attacking them and killing them or mauling them. So I started reading about this and I was like, this has to be climate. Like, this is so weird. And sure enough, I looked through like 12 articles, and eventually there was one that said the black bears have lost their food source, this particular kind of like nut, which I didn't know bears ate nuts. But because of that, they're now coming down. And in the article, all it was one line where the journalist said, because of the loss of these nuts due to climate drought, and I was like, I got it all. So I think it's fair to be strategic, be smart. Sports, let your headlines lead, but don't like blow past that moment where whatever match you're reporting on was delayed because of freaky climate storms. Like So yeah, I think like there's no sort of applicable rule that goes across all journalism. If you work for the BBC, like the BBC has been terrible on climate reporting, yet I have no doubt there are great climate reporters there. So you kind of have to forge your own path and figure like, am I doing enough that it's okay to keep this job, or am I fooling myself because I have a good salary? It's a lot of individual calculus that we have to put into play.
Um, I'm going to ask. I've got one more question. Then I'm going to come. That we've had so many comments, as you can imagine, Adam, like coming in and questions from people. My aim is to get through as many of them as possible. But I suppose the final one from me before we to move to
By
more
the
of
way,
those.
Greg, I can be way quicker.
Nah.
And
All good, all good,
these are great questions, so I'm
good.
kind of digging in. But
No,
if you want me to go rapid fire, I will do it.
we've still got half an hour. We're good. We want you to go into the detail that you feel is necessary. Yeah, it's
Love
all
it.
okay.
Love it.
People understand that if there are questions that we don't reach, that's it happens all the time, unfortunately. But we'll do our best. So I suppose like what I mean, given sort of building on the success of Don't Look Up, you talked about like the response to it and how it went global. You reached a lot of people, possibly that people that you weren't expecting to reach with that. And you've talked about your work that you're doing in those dedicated organizations that are trying all kinds of ways to uplift these stories around climate change. I suppose, the obvious journalist question in me is like, what comes next? Is there anything that you're working on that you want to share what's the next thing that you're exploring that you think will have impact?
So I've had a script that I've worked on for about 3 years. It was initially called 2C, but I'm kind of playing around with the title. We have a bunch of big stars attached to it. It is an epic climate movie that is about, I mean, I think everyone knows at this point we're not going to avoid 2C. So it's about what does that mean? If the human story changed 11,500 years ago with the advent of the Holocene and a relatively stable climate, we have now exited that. And what does that mean for the human story? And I think it's really important that people have some framework for that, which sadly I don't know if they do right now. So we're trying to get that going. And then we're doing a bunch of other projects that glance against it and deal with elements. We have like a shark movie coming out for Sony that is really like fun, thrilling, but it's about increased hurricanes in the Gulf Coast. And the premise is that the storm surge brings sharks in, which, given the bear story I just told, is not that fantastic. So, yeah, we're looking at all directions. I mean, I think one thing we're really good at is telling, whether you like them or not, captivating stories or different types of stories.
Excellent. I can't wait for the Bear movie about Tokyo as well. By the way, we've got lots of members based in Tokyo here on the call who've been sharing comments about their ex recent experiences there,
Ooh.
including people that have been had to take cable cars in certain parts of the city because they're not allowed to travel in certain neighborhoods because of what's going on and all kinds of things. So if you need contributors on your Bear Hollywood movie, Adam, you've got them in the OCJN.
You know what? That's no joke. Like, it could be an incredible documentary, and I would love to hear from some of these people, or if there's an email to put all of their links. Like,
Yeah.
that's exactly the kind of documentary our company would do.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, let's make that happen. I'm going to come to a question from Milana, who's in Norway, a journalist in Norway, who says, it seems relatively few creatives, at least in the mainstream, are making art about the climate crisis. Why do you think that is? Is it difficult to tell these stories?
You know, I mean, that's another question I've banged my head against. Honestly, it's money. It's There's a lot of these people are worth 100 million, 200 million, half a billion, and they create cultures for themselves where they don't hear reality. And the only reason I say this is I've spent years talking to these people, and I can tell it just comes down to, and I've even said to them, I can put you on the phone with NASA scientists, but because the general culture doesn't reflect this urgency, it becomes like, well, am I going to trust a scientist on the phone, or Adam McKay, the guy who did Talladega Nights or whatever? And the answer is always like, they're busy, they're rich, they want to feel good. So I would say, yeah, that's the problem. And it's taken me a long time to get to the point where I have no judgment. It just is what it is. And 96% of the people in Hollywood or the huge music world, they just don't know. They're way too comfortable, which is why I encourage us to create a new culture of people that are connected to reality, whether they're rich or in the top 10 movies or album sales. I really think if you look at it strategically like a game, where are we right now with climate, knowing that 2050 is going to be devastating and probably 2035 is? We have to like quickly abandon this corporate culture that we've been connected to. Like, we have to get out of it fast. And we have to get out of these two-party systems like Labor and Tory, Democrat, Republican. Like, we just have to like run away from them. And I say that purely as strategy. It's not an emotional thing, but I don't see any other way if we keep giving the BBC, the New York Times, the stock market, billionaires, trillionaires, credence, we will die. I didn't know I was going to say that, but it's true. It's true.
Yep. I would say, like, I would also say, like, we've worked with journalists from the BBC and other big outlets within the OCJN, and as you pointed out earlier, there are people that are incredibly in tune with this work and doing great work within those organisations. But yeah, it's sometimes, certainly for kind of audiences outside of where that reporting is coming out from, it's hard to make head nor tail of some of that stuff. I want to come to a question from Jean Paulo, who's in Belgium, who's an editor in an editor in Belgium, who says, in fact, what I will do, I will also note that, like, if I can feel a little bit of jolting happening on my video. So if I do disappear suddenly, I'm sure Kat and Diego will temporarily come on whilst if I do disappear. But I'll come to this question from Jean Paulo. who says, Don't Look Up was released. When Don't Look Up was released, we had a feeling that something, including the US, could have been done for tackling climate change. Now the mood feels very different, with climate change being labelled a scam by the US administration, and climate change being banned from some discourses. What is your feeling about that? And I suppose also more broadly, how should climate aware journalists, activists, and public figures, what should they do to keep the reporting and awareness alive?
Well, there are two questions there. The first question is, where are we in the arc of rapid anthropogenic climate change? The second question is, how do you strategically, morally, emotionally respond to where we are, the failure of government, news media? So, I mean, the reason I found the German scientists' correction of the IPCC estimate so significant was that that's like no joke. I mean, that's the end of the Holocene, the Pleistocene. I mean, we are talking billions of deaths, climate refugees, shortages of food. We basically, and no offense to animals, we become animals at that point. And the idea of using advanced science just goes out the window. So, how do you take that in as a journalist? And, you know, it's interesting. I've done a lot of reading and studying, and I've just become really interested in the French resistance during World War II. And it's a pretty good one-to-one relationship to what we're seeing now. And the French resistance used code words, they used code language, they didn't give up their positions of power, but they undermined the level of corruption they were dealing with. They a lot of times died. They a lot of times were killed, tortured, but the power structure they created was decentralized. And I really think we're headed towards a moment where it's going to be like human life versus financial markets, AI. And we just need to be really adaptable. We need to have each other's backs, even if, like, you know, and plenty of people didn't, like, you didn't like Don't Look Up. Like, who cares? It's like a movie review. The point is, we're all in this. Or if you're a journalist for an outlet that does kind of like watery climate coverage, and I might meet you and be like, I don't know, they kind of do lame stuff. Like, I shouldn't do that. Like, let's assume that you're doing the best you can. So I really think the new age we're in right now is like, we need hyper solidarity. Are you with life, human beings, the natural world, or are you for the financial markets and billionaires, and we're close to trillionaires?
Mm-hmm. Next, I want to come to Vanessa, who's a journalist based in London and sometimes Hong Kong. And Vanessa says, as a journalist and documentary filmmaker, I find it hard to balance between entertainment and information. Sometimes when I try to include too much information in a video, I feel it gets boring. How do you make sure that in the work that you do, you try and strike the right balance?
I mean, this is it's a great question. But it's also a crazy question in the sense that we are at this moment in the history of not even just human beings, but planet Earth, where the planet, according to the science we know, but it's pretty clear, has never warmed this rapidly. And we are in a whole new framework of how we live, how we interact with the world. So it's always funny to me when people are like, how do you make that entertaining? to me, it's like, how do you make the movie Twister or like, how do you make the movie Jaws entertaining? Other than certain apex predators behaving in ways that you're not used to, we're really worried about Jaws being entertaining. So I think it's really important to identify bad faith notes. So I have a friend who, hosts a big news show here in the US, and he was telling me climate doesn't get ratings. And I said to him, let me write your opening. And then I sent him 3 clips of crazy climate disasters. And I was like, really? You can't get ratings off of a EF2 sandstorm tornado bearing down like, and he was like, well, I can't let you write it. And I was like, so you have no people that work for you that can talk about 7 water spouts on Lake Erie, which, by the way, really happened like a year ago. And then, of course, he changed the subject, and we don't talk much.
And now we deleted each other's numbers.
But by the way, fuck him. I mean, honestly, like, you ghoul, he has kids. They're going to die because of this. And yet he's annoyed that I'm putting him through the paces. But yeah.
Question on something we talk about a lot in the network is that, again, I mentioned this earlier, but the types of stories that we try and report out and the approaches that we take. There's obviously a lot of discussion around solutions journalism, so basically trying to tell the stories of action, of people doing something that is contributing positively to what's going on in the situation. What are your views on that?
Ooh, that is tricky, man. Whenever I read solutions journalism, I'm always like, I know there's a good person behind this. But all right. So here's my problem when I hear the word climate solution is just according to the raw, naked science. The first window of decreasing CO2 emissions by switching to solar and hydro, we've got to get to here by here. It's over. Like that is just according to the raw science. So when I see people talk about net zero by 2050, and I'm not saying every journalist who writes about climate solutions is saying that, but when I see someone buy into that, or let's say using a 10 or 20-year average for global warming, and they tell me, well, we're at 1.2 right now. I'm just like, you are full of it. You are not living in the current science. So, I mean, the window for we're going to get to zero emissions has closed. I mean, that whole approach is over. And we're in a new reality now, which is we're going to need to innovate, scale up tech for carbon removal, for geoengineering. And I know that sets off red flags for everyone, which it should, but like the oil companies never gave a shit. The governments never cared. And now here we are. So it's very tricky when I see someone use the phrase climate solutions. I right away get dubious unless they're talking about these fairly unpopular, radical climate solutions. Yeah, we're in a terrible situation. Like
Mm.
I never wanted to be the guy who was saying we should look into geoengineering. Like I'm a climate guy from a little bit back, and I knew that geoengineering was BS from the oil companies, carbon removal, the tech wasn't there. But I mean, a lot of my personal energy is now going towards carbon removal, and there's like 4 private companies that seem like they've got something, but it's interesting because they have no money. I mean, they have very small money. So,
Mm.
yeah, I would just be careful using the term climate solutions.
Interesting. Thanks, Adam. I think it's interesting. We have a number of speakers that talk about approaches during the time that we spend in the community, and I think there's a diversity of views there, definitely in terms of like what resonates with people, what brings audiences in, and what can turn people off. And I think what we see right now is a lot of different approaches, a lot of people trying different things.
Can I say one thing really quickly?
Mm,
The number one thing that Yellow Dot Hyperobject confronted pretty quickly was this misapplied idea that you have to give people hope. And it's an old advertising kind of idea that you lure people through the positive of it. And it's just a poison pill. People need to be alarmed and aware of the stakes. And there have been studies after studies that have shown this, but there's obviously a lot of financial, moral hazards, to use in economic terms, conflicts of interest against this. And it's really important to be aware that alarm and action beats vague hope every time. Anyway, go on.
no. It's interesting because yeah, we definitely hear conflicting views on that front, and that also says that it's based on kind of modern psychology of the types of stories that resonate with people, and that some people, does when people feel discouraged or they feel like they have a lack of agency, like are they invited to act? Does that do anything like, and what type of, how does alarm make people feel? I think quite rightly there's a lot of sort of discussion around the types of stories that are effective.
I'm going to give you a hard time. I don't even know if it's quite rightly. I'm 57. I've spent my whole life, basically, my whole adult life, working in mass media, TV, film. Uh, it's the idea that you strip alarm and urgency from a situation. I think it's a bad faith argument. I think whenever I hear someone say that, I right away go, what is their job? Do they have tenure? Are they a journalist at a bullshit outlet? Like it's really counterintuitive. It's like doing breast cancer checks, but you're like, even if we find something, you're probably like the urgency and the fact that we know people that have died from cancer is what motivates the action. So, and a lot of the ad agencies and companies, do work with all the creepy companies that surround this. So I would just say be really vigilant about conflict of interest and moral hazard. Because as someone who's spent, my entire adult life living and working within mass media and like all that, I know a lot about that stuff. And I can tell you the idea that you're going to bum people out by being for real with them is ridiculous. I mean, like, just counterintuitive to every single thing that we know about how media works. So be wary of people that talk like that. I mean, there's a slang for people that talk like that. They call it, they're peddling hopium. And I agree. I've seen a lot of that and I've challenged it. And the answers I've gotten are very weak.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing thoughts on that. I think we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to come to one more. First off, apologies to those that I didn't get to come to the questions for. Hopefully, because some of the questions have been along like similar lines, that you've got kind of answers for some of the things that you wanted to be inquisitive about. Come to Helen, who's in Hong Kong, who says, I'm interested to understand what you believe mainstream media needs to do to get it right on climate coverage. And do you see a difference in climate coverage between TV, digital, and social spaces?
Really quickly, mainstream media needs to use alarm, urgency words. They need to push climate into a headline. Great example, the story of the German scientists saying we're going to hit 3C by 2050. Any even semi responsible news outlet that doesn't have that as the headline, right away, they're compromised, broken, false. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. We might even have time to squeeze one more in here. Hang on. Um, where should we come to? We've got, let me have a look here. Sorry, I'm trying to make my way through an abundance of questions. Um, where should we come to next? I suppose there was a sort of general question earlier on, and apologies, I've kind of lost track of who asked it, and that they basically said we're like from a kind of international journalism perspective, we look around and we see governments kind of doing the stuff that you outlined in Don't Look Up, those the sort of the narrative that was the heart of that movie in terms of those scientists being gaslit by what was going on, like feeling kind of like their voice couldn't be heard no matter how high they raise the alarm. Like we do see that the level of inaction, particularly within governments, sort of persist all around the world. So I suppose, and apologies, I can't remember who asked the question. It would be like, what is your message? We know that the climate change needs lots of actors to be involved in this, no pun intended, like business, civil society, etc. But what is your message to the governments that are not doing enough?
You are the governments that aren't doing enough. You are not a legitimate government. If you are steering the people that you're supposed to protect and take care of towards mass death and starvation, like Keir Starmer is not a legitimate prime minister. The Tories are not a legitimate party. I think most of the world knows that Donald Trump and even Joe Biden before him are not legitimate leaders. So, the good news is they're going to collapse themselves, but we should not engage with the terms of their conversations or arguments. They are corrupted, they are false, they are lunatics, they are creeps, they are fools. And it's important to let those feelings, I mean, the big thing they try and do is squash emotion. And climate collapse is all about emotion. So I think it's up to each of us to really find that balance of how to let those emotions out. And I get it. You have to pay your bills, you need your paycheck. But we should really be looking at that balance. And I'm sure some people are like, well, dude, you've had movies, you've made millions of dollars, and you are correct that it's easy for me to say, even though we're going to, give away every dime we have and sell our house. I mean, we're committed to the climate movement, but it's up to each of us to do that internal moral inventory about how do we face, literally, without exaggeration, the collapse of all of civilization that is happening right in front of us, while there are large portions of our information ecosystem that are telling us that it's not.
Mm-hmm. Well, Adam, that is pretty much we've all got time. That's the time we've got with you today, unfortunately. I want to kind of end by just extending a huge thank you for coming to speak to us. Like it's a great privilege to welcome you amongst our community of journalists that are all trying to do. I think our mission is not dissimilar from yours in terms of like what everybody's trying to do, and so to come and share your views in this space are very, very welcome. And thank you so much for making the time. And we really look forward to what comes next, and we hope it has equal, if not more, impact than the stuff that you've done so far.
I mean, honestly, love, solidarity, and respect. There's no group of people I respect more than climate journalists and activists, which you're close. So if my criticism of the mainstream media ruffled you, no, I know you are trying to get the truth out there, and huge love and respect.
It's fine. We're going to make that bear movie about Tokyo, so we're all good. No, we greatly appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for joining, whatever time it is, wherever you are in the world. Just a final kind of housekeeping note. Tomorrow is our final session with the OCJN. Please do come and join us if you can make it. Yeah, best wishes to everybody. Thanks so much for making this call. And Adam, huge thanks again to you. And yeah, wish you enjoy the time off that you've got over the next few weeks. And thanks again.
Thank you, Greg. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Hope we can see you tomorrow.
That was
Bye.
great
Thanks,
question.
Adam.
Conference, take it easy.
Bye.
Thanks, Adam.
Bye.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Adam.
See you.